Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
Hello and welcome to Soot Black Nights. There's a particular kind of dark that's left behind after the fire goes out. Heavy, quiet, clinging to everything it touches. That's the dark we sit in here. A good number of you keep finding your way back, night after night, and I never forget that. There's a reason these nights hold you the way they do. The stories told here don't come from just anywhere. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I read each and every one. And if these stories leave their mark on you, a like and a subscribe carry this channel further than you'd imagine. Now, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow and let the dark close in. When I was in 6th grade, I was naturally aggressive. Not in the sense that I went around looking for fights every day, but I definitely had a temper, especially when it came to people messing with my friends. I was one of those kids who would immediately get angry if I saw somebody getting picked on. And back then, I handled problems with emotion first and common sense second. There was this one kid in our grade who had a reputation for being rough with people. Loud, cocky, always trying to embarrass somebody in front of others. One day during school, he ended up kicking one of my acquaintances straight in the groin. And I mean hard. The guy dropped to the ground immediately while this kid just stood there laughing about it. What made me even angrier was the size difference between them. We were all around 6th grade age, most of us already close to 5 feet tall or around there. But the kid he kicked was tiny, probably around 4'3" or something like that. Skinny little dude. Seeing him curled up on the ground while this guy laughed really pissed me off. Now looking back, it was such a stupid middle school situation. But when you are that age, everything feels huge. Respect feels huge. Embarrassment feels huge. Pride feels huge. Your emotions completely control you because you are still too young to step back and think clearly. So while the kid was laughing at my acquaintance, I walked over and flipped his hat off his head. That was it. That tiny little thing. I still remember the look he gave me afterward, too. Like he could not believe somebody had actually done something back to him in front of other people. He picked the hat up, looking angry. So naturally, my dumb 6th grade brain decided to flip it again, then again. At that point, the entire situation became unavoidable, because middle school operates on an insane social system, where once people think a fight might happen, they treat it like a major sporting event. Immediately, people started crowding around us going, "Oh!" like idiots. The kid got angry and told me he wanted to fight me at lunch. And honestly, I was fine with it. I was already heated and stubborn enough that backing down did not even cross my mind. The rest of the morning felt endless because word spread fast around school. By lunchtime, people were already talking about it like some huge showdown. Kids kept coming up asking if we were actually going to fight. Even while we were literally standing in line getting lunch, him and one of his friends were talking trash, saying I was about to get messed up. I remember acting confident outwardly, but internally my adrenaline was already building. Even when you think you can win a fight, Your body still knows something bad is about to happen. At one point, a lunch aide actually came over and quietly asked if I was okay and said she could tell the principal if I wanted her to. And honestly, that was probably the moment where a smarter version of me should have just said yes. But middle school pride is unbelievably stupid. At that age, avoiding a fight feels worse than the fight itself because you think everybody will clown you forever if you back out. So I shook it off and kept going. Then recess came. And by that point, the entire day had turned into nonstop instigating from other kids. Fight him already. You scared? Who's gonna win? People love violence when they are not the ones getting hit. I was honestly annoyed more than nervous at that point. I just wanted to get it over with so everybody would shut up already. Deep down, I believed I could beat him. So fear was not the main emotion anymore. Irritation was. Everybody started pointing toward where he was standing when recess started. So I walked over, and that is when I noticed his hand. The dude had put on a ring. Not some tiny decorative ring either. One of those chunky metal rings people think makes punches hit harder. The second I saw it, my brain immediately shifted into panic mode, because suddenly the fight felt more dangerous. Up until then, I pictured a dumb school fight where two kids swing badly at each other for 30 seconds before adults stop it. But seeing the ring made me think, okay, this dude actually wants to hurt me. And once adrenaline hits like that, your brain starts moving fast. I remember thinking instantly that if I did not rush him first, I was probably going to get my face split open. So the second thing started, I lunged forward. I punched him near the eye first. Then he hit me back almost immediately, with the hand wearing the ring. I still remember the sharp feeling of it hitting above my eye. Not enough to seriously injure me, but enough to instantly make me realize how bad that could have gone. At that point, everything turned into chaos the way school fights always do. No technique, no dramatic movie stuff. Just two angry kids throwing wild punches, while a crowd screamed around us. I managed to throw him to the ground and started doing some dumb ground and pound nonsense the way kids think fighting works after watching too many movies and UFC clips. Then people finally rushed in and pulled us apart. Teachers started yelling. Kids scattered everywhere. Both of us got dragged toward the office. By then, my adrenaline was crashing, and I could feel the pain properly. I had a nasty mark near my eye from the ring punch, and his eye looked rough, too, from where I hit him. The funny thing is that middle school culture immediately turned the entire thing into discussions about who won. Everybody kept telling me I won the fight. And honestly, at that age, that mattered to me more than it should have. But then something happened afterward that completely changed how I saw the whole situation. We were sitting in the office waiting for parents to arrive when his mom came in. And the second she walked through the door, she just started crying. Not angry crying either. Exhausted crying. The kind of crying where somebody looks emotionally broken already before they even speak. I remember her apologizing over and over for her son's behavior. But then she started talking about his home life, and everything suddenly felt different. She talked about how bad things were between him and his dad, how his father physically abused him, emotionally abused him, how rough life at home was constantly. And I remember just sitting there feeling awful, because suddenly the kid I had been angry at all day no longer looked like some bully villain from a middle school drama. He looked like a messed up kid, carrying around way more pain than any sixth grader should have been carrying. That moment genuinely broke me emotionally, because I realized that instead of escalating things and getting caught up in pride and ego, I could have just walked away. Sure, people might have called me a coward for a while. Who cares? Middle school ends, people move on. None of those opinions matter years later. But at that age, it feels like social humiliation is the end of the world. The kid I fought eventually apologized to me, too. And I apologized back. Not because suddenly we became best friends or anything dramatic, but because after hearing about his life, it became impossible not to feel sympathy for him. My own parents were rough, too, growing up. But listening to what he dealt with made me realize he had it much worse. After that, we were never super close, but we were cool with each other all through high school. There was never bad blood again. And honestly, seeing him over the years was kind of sad. You could tell he was struggling internally, even when he tried acting normal. He got into partying young, drugs, rough crowds, all that stuff. He always had this energy like somebody trying to outrun their own life. Every now and then, I would hear stories about him getting into trouble or spiraling again. But whenever I actually talked to him face to face, he still seemed like there was a decent person somewhere underneath everything. Then years passed. By October 2019, I was in my senior year of college working as a student teacher. Life had moved on completely by then. One day, I went to visit a friend just to hang out for a bit, and by coincidence, the same guy I fought back in 6th grade happened to be there too. It honestly felt surreal seeing him after all those years because suddenly we were adults talking about adult life instead of dumb middle school drama. We talked about work, money, the future, trying to figure life out after college. He still had that rough around the edges vibe, but he also sounded like he genuinely wanted to change things. He talked about trying to get a job and turn his life around. And I remember thinking, good, maybe things are finally stabilizing for him. I wished him luck when I left, and that was basically the end of the night. Then, about a week later, my mom texted me a news article. And the second I saw his face on the front page, my stomach dropped. I opened the article and started reading. According to the report, he had gone to a party, gotten heavily intoxicated, and later ended up alone in a car with a girl. Things got sexual. During sex, he was choking her. Not violently in the way people usually imagine murder, but apparently in that reckless, rough sex way some people normalize now without fully understanding how dangerous it actually is. Except he went too far. She lost consciousness, and she never woke up. I remember sitting there staring at the article, feeling sick. The report said he called the police afterward himself. Then came the arrest, jail, all of it. And just like that, the last memory I had of him talking about fixing his life got replaced with this horrifying tragedy instead. What stayed with me most afterward was not even anger. It was sadness. Because when I thought back across everything, it just felt like watching somebody slowly lose a fight against their own life for years until eventually something irreversible happened. That obviously does not excuse what happened to the girl. A young woman lost her life because of reckless, dangerous behavior. Nothing changes that. But at the same time, it was hard not to think back to that crying mother in the middle school office years earlier, talking about abuse, violence, and chaos at home. Sometimes you can almost see the damage spreading forward through somebody's life in slow motion. Not everybody who grows up in abusive environments ends up hurting others, but some people never fully escape the destruction they were raised inside. And honestly, one of the biggest lessons I took from all of it was realizing how quickly dumb decisions can permanently ruin lives. One moment of recklessness, one stupid decision while intoxicated, one situation getting out of control, and suddenly somebody is dead, another person is headed to prison, families are destroyed, and dozens of lives change forever. It also made me realize something else, too. A lot of people treat choking during sex like some harmless trend because they see it online or hear people joke about it casually. But there is nothing harmless about cutting off somebody's airflow or blood circulation, especially while drugs or alcohol are involved. People seriously underestimate how quickly things can go wrong, and in this case, they did. Years ago, I heard a story through a friend of a friend that stuck with me in a way very few stories ever have. Even now, long after first hearing it, I still randomly think about it sometimes late at night. It had that strange urban legend feeling where part of you immediately wants to dismiss it because it sounds way too horrifying to possibly be true, but another part of you cannot stop thinking about it because the details feel just believable enough. And honestly, I think that is what makes certain stories spread so aggressively. Not necessarily because every detail is proven true, but because they tap directly into fears people already have deep down. This one started like a completely ordinary night. According to the story, there was a young woman who went out clubbing with a group of friends one weekend. Nothing unusual, just people trying to relax, drink, dance, flirt, and escape normal life for a few hours. Anybody who has been to clubs knows the atmosphere. Loud bass shaking the floor, colored lights flashing constantly across people's faces, crowded dance floors where everybody is half hidden in darkness and smoke machines. Conversations happening inches from somebody's ear because the music is too loud to speak normally. The kind of environment where strangers become familiar very quickly. You dance with somebody for 20 minutes and suddenly it feels like you know them, even though you actually know nothing about them at all. Apparently, sometime during the night, she met a guy there. From what I heard, he seemed completely normal, not creepy, not awkward, not aggressive. Actually, the opposite. The way the story was told, he was apparently attractive, charming, confident, and easy to talk to. The kind of guy nobody would hesitate to flirt with in a nightclub. And honestly, that detail always made the story feel worse to me. People want dangerous individuals to look obviously dangerous. They want warning signs, creepy behavior, something visibly wrong that triggers alarm bells immediately. But real life rarely works that way. Some of the worst people on Earth survive specifically because they know how to appear harmless long enough to gain trust. Anyway, according to the story, they danced together for a while, flirted, bought drinks, and eventually started making out somewhere inside the club. Nothing beyond that, though. And according to the story, that decision may have saved her life. Eventually, the night ended. She left with her friends, went home, slept, and probably thought almost nothing else about the guy afterward. Just another random club encounter. One of those nights people barely even remember a week later. Then, a few days later, she noticed something strange on her face. At first, it apparently looked minor, just redness and irritation around parts of her mouth and cheeks. She probably assumed it was some kind of allergic reaction, skin irritation, or maybe even a reaction to makeup. But instead of going away, it got worse. The way it was described sounded awful. Painful redness, blotchy patches, skin irritation spreading slowly across parts of her face. Apparently, it started becoming painful enough that she finally decided to see a dermatologist. And honestly, up until that point, the story still sounds unpleasant but believable. People get weird infections and rashes all the time. Skin conditions can look horrifying even when they are treatable. But this is where the story suddenly shifts into nightmare territory. According to the version I heard, the dermatologist became concerned because the rash did not resemble anything common. The doctor apparently could not immediately identify it and decided to take small tissue samples from the affected skin for testing. Then the woman went home waiting for answers. A few days passed. And then police showed up at her house. That part always disturbed me deeply because imagine how terrifying that would feel. You think you are dealing with some strange medical problem. Then suddenly detectives are standing at your door asking questions about recent physical contact with strangers. Apparently, she was completely confused at first. Then they explained what the lab results supposedly showed. According to the story, the tissue samples contained bacteria associated with decomposing human remains, corpse bacteria. Even hearing those words gives the story this horrible, sick feeling. The dermatologist apparently contacted authorities immediately because there was no normal explanation for why someone would be exposed to those bacteria in that situation. So detectives began asking about anybody she had recently kissed or been intimate with. And that is when she mentioned the guy from the nightclub. The horrifying implication immediately became obvious. The man she met had somehow recently been around decomposing bodies, close enough to carry the bacteria on his skin. That idea alone is enough to make your stomach turn. But according to the story, she could barely help police identify him because she hardly knew anything about him. No last name, no address, no social media, nothing. Just a face in a nightclub. And honestly, that detail may be the scariest part of all when you really think about it. You can spend hours beside somebody, dance with them, laugh with them, kiss them, and still know absolutely nothing about who they really are once the lights come on. Apparently, police eventually tracked him down anyway. I do not know how. Different versions of the story explain that part differently. Some say security cameras helped. Others say the woman eventually remembered enough details about him or the club staff recognized him. But according to the story, detectives eventually located the man's apartment. And what they found inside was horrifying. 2 naked female corpses. That was the version I originally heard, at least. Other versions online change details slightly. Sometimes it is 1 body instead of 2. Sometimes it happens in a different country. Sometimes the skin condition changes depending on who tells it. That is one reason I suspect parts of the story may have evolved over time the way urban legends always do. But honestly, even if the exact details are exaggerated or partly fictional, the fear underneath the story feels real enough that people continue repeating it decades later. Because the core fear itself is universal. How little we actually know about strangers, especially in places designed around quick attraction and temporary trust. Nightclubs are strange environments when you think about them. Loud music, darkness, alcohol, excitement, physical closeness, and everybody presenting polished versions of themselves. People become comfortable with each other incredibly fast in those spaces. You trust smiles, confidence, body language, attractiveness, charm, but none of those things actually tell you who somebody really is once they leave the room. And that is the part of the story that always stayed with me most. Not even the corpse bacteria detail, horrifying as it is. It is the thought of how close she may have come to becoming another victim without realizing it. According to the story, she only briefly interacted with him before leaving. 1 decision, 1 different choice at the end of the night. And maybe the entire outcome changes. That idea scares people because it forces them to confront how random safety sometimes is. We like believing danger announces itself clearly, that predators look evil, that monsters reveal themselves immediately. But many dangerous people survive specifically because they can appear charming, attractive, calm, funny, or trustworthy long enough to get close to others. That is what makes stories like this linger in people's minds long afterward. Because whether fully true or not, the story taps directly into a terrifying reality. Some of the scariest people do not look frightening at all. Sometimes they look like the attractive stranger buying drinks at a crowded club while music blasts in the background and everybody around them is laughing. And sometimes, after dancing, flirting, and kissing strangers all night, they go home afterward to something unimaginably awful waiting behind a locked apartment door. When I was around 6 years old, I started going through a period of my life that still unsettles me even now as an adult. Back then, I did not really have the words to explain what was happening, and honestly, I still do not completely understand it today. The easiest explanation would probably be hallucinations mixed with nightmares, and that is usually how I tell the story when people ask about it. But deep down, part of me has always struggled with that explanation because some of those experiences felt so vivid and strangely consistent that even now they sit in my memory differently than dreams do. And the weirdest part is that some of the nightmares never fully stopped. Even now, years later, every once in a while I still see pieces of them again. It started with smaller things during the daytime. I would sometimes see things that nobody else seemed to notice. Usually it happened outside rather than inside. One thing I saw often was this German shepherd standing somewhere in the distance, not acting aggressive, just there. Sometimes on sidewalks, sometimes near empty streets, sometimes looking directly at me before disappearing when I looked away again. The strange thing was how normal it always seemed at first. My brain never immediately reacted with fear because the dog looked completely real. It was only afterward that I realized nobody else reacted to it. Then there was the girl. To this day, she still creeps me out more than anything else I saw. She always appeared alone in quiet places, especially damp areas for some reason, near drainage ditches, empty corners near buildings, places where the ground looked wet after rain. She had long gray hair and wore this faded gray dress that looked old-fashioned somehow. Every single time I saw her, she would be sitting, curled up with her knees pulled against her chest. Never moving at first, never speaking, just sitting there completely still. Then eventually, she would slowly turn her head toward me and smile. Not a huge horror movie smile, just enough to make my stomach drop instantly. The second she looked at me, I would panic and run. And every time I looked back afterward, she would already be gone. I never understood why she frightened me so badly compared to everything else. There was just something deeply wrong about her presence. Not violent, exactly. More like she did not belong there. But as strange as those daytime things were, nighttime was worse. Much worse. That is when I started seeing him. The man in the top hat. Even writing that sounds ridiculous because it sounds exactly like one of those internet shadow people stories everybody tells online now. But this happened long before I ever heard anybody else describe similar things. The first time I saw him is burned into my memory so clearly that even now I could probably sketch the scene from memory. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I noticed movement near my bookcase. At first I thought it was just darkness playing tricks on me. Kids imagine things at night all the time. But then I realized there was an actual figure crouched beside the shelves. He was tall even while crouching. Thin. completely dark like a silhouette cut out of shadow. And he was wearing a top hat. I remember staring at him, completely frozen, because part of my brain could not process what I was looking at. He did not feel dreamlike. He looked physically present in my room. His head tilted slightly to one side as he stared at me. And what terrified me most were the empty sockets where his eyes should have been. Not bloody or grotesque, just empty darkness. I remember us maintaining eye contact for what felt like forever, while I lay there, completely unable to move. Fear does strange things to your body as a child. Sometimes you become so scared you almost disconnect from yourself. Then he squinted slightly like he was confused about something. That detail stuck with me because it felt oddly human. Not evil, not monstrous, just confused. The second I regained control of my body, I threw myself under the blankets, shaking. I stayed there for what felt like hours. Eventually, I peeked back out, and he was gone. Now, if that had only happened once, I probably would have convinced myself it was a nightmare or sleep paralysis eventually. But I kept seeing him. Not every night, just sometimes. Always inside my room. Always acting strangely human. One night I woke up and saw him sitting in my spinning chair across the room. His fingers tapped slowly against the armrest like he was deep in thought, trying to solve some impossible problem. Another time he stood partially hidden behind my bedroom door watching me. That time he had yellowish eyes, not glowing dramatically, just visible enough in the darkness to stand out against the rest of him. And the expression in those eyes always seemed emotional somehow. Curious, frustrated, confused, interested, never mindless. That is part of why I became less afraid of him over time. As insane as this sounds, he slowly started feeling familiar, like some strange creature that kept appearing in my room trying to understand the world around him. Sometimes I would wake up and find him back near the bookcase, staring at objects almost like he was studying them. Other times he seemed frustrated by something I could not understand. Then came the strangest moment of all. One night I woke up and saw him holding one of my books, actually reading it. He sat in my chair with wide green eyes that looked almost excited or fascinated. I remember just staring at him in confusion because it was such a bizarrely normal thing for a shadow creature to be doing. Not haunting me, not threatening me, reading. And somehow that was the moment I stopped truly fearing him. I started thinking of him almost like a strange roommate that only appeared at night. I know how insane that sounds, but childhood brains adapt quickly to things they cannot explain. Once something terrifying becomes familiar enough, fear sometimes changes into curiosity instead. And honestly, he became oddly comforting sometimes. Not safe exactly, but familiar, predictable, like a strange silent presence wandering around my room trying to understand things. The next morning, I noticed the book he had been reading was sitting on my table out of place. That moment bothered me for years afterward, because I knew where I had left that book originally, and part of me still insists I did not move it myself. That single detail became the thing my brain obsessed over endlessly later in life. Because if I moved it unconsciously, then everything probably was just dreams or hallucinations. But if I did not, then what exactly did I see? Over time, I became genuinely attached to him in a weird way. I know that sounds ridiculous for something that terrified me originally, but he felt more curious than malicious most of the time, like some confused observer trying to work things out. Then came the last night I ever saw him, and it changed everything instantly. I woke up thirsty sometime during the night and sat up near the bottom of my bed, reaching for a drink. Then I realized he was standing directly in front of me, closer than ever before, only inches away from my face. And his eyes were red, not soft yellow, not curious green, red. There was something completely different about him that night. The confusion and curiosity were gone. The atmosphere in the room felt wrong immediately, heavy somehow. And for the first time ever, he reached toward me. I remember the movement so clearly, his hands slowly extending forward. And pure terror slammed into me instantly. Not nervousness, not childhood fear, real panic. I threw myself under the blankets, crying harder than I ever had before. I stayed hidden there until morning, and after that night, I never saw him again. Not once. The dog disappeared eventually, too. So did the gray-haired girl. But him especially stayed with me. Years passed, then decades. And somehow I still think about him all the time. I still tell myself they were hallucinations or vivid dreams because logically, that is the explanation that makes the most sense. Kids experience strange sleep-related hallucinations sometimes. Imagination mixes with fear and stress. Memory becomes unreliable over time. I know all of that, but still, none of it felt like dreams. Dreams fade strangely after waking up. They lose structure. Details blur together. But those memories stayed sharp. The angle of his head, the tapping fingers on the chair, the curious expressions in his eyes, the book in his hands. And weirdly enough, despite how terrified I was during that final encounter, part of me still misses him sometimes. Not because I believe he was real exactly, but because for years he felt like this strange, mysterious presence that existed only for me. My shadow man. Curious, silent, watching the world through empty eyes while trying to understand something I never could. My stepsister told me a story years ago that still creeps me out every time I think about it, mostly because of how strangely specific the details were. It was not one of those dramatic ghost stories with things flying around the room or monsters jumping out of the dark. Honestly, the story was scary precisely because nobody involved ever figured out what they actually saw. According to her, this happened when she was pretty young. Early teens at most, maybe even younger. She had one of her friends staying over for a sleepover during summer break. And like most kids that age, they stayed awake way later than they were supposed to. The house they lived in back then was in a pretty isolated area. Not completely middle of nowhere rural, but close enough that nights were genuinely dark there. No rows of streetlights, no nearby neighborhoods glowing in the distance. Their backyard was not fenced in either, because there was not really much reason for one. Behind the house were mostly empty fields, trees, and uneven land stretching out farther than you could properly see at night. My stepsister always said nighttime looked different out there compared to cities. On clear nights, the moonlight was bright enough that you could actually make out shapes and movement far away because there was almost no artificial light interfering with the darkness. Anyway, at some point, late that night, she and her friend decided to sneak outside into the backyard area. Nothing unusual. Kids do that kind of thing all the time during sleepovers because everything feels more exciting at night. They were probably just talking, wandering around, trying to scare each other with ghost stories or whatever teenagers do when adults are asleep. At first, everything was normal, quiet, still. Just insects buzzing and wind moving through trees. Then they noticed movement out in the distance. Not super far away, but not close either. There was this raised hill-like area behind part of the property. And standing up there was a group of people. At least they assumed they were people. My stepsister said there were enough of them that it immediately stood out because nobody normally wandered around that area at night, especially not in groups. At first, the girls mostly just stared in confusion. The moonlight was bright enough that they could not clearly see faces or clothing, but they could make out outlines and movement. Dark figures standing together at the top of the hill. And apparently, they were moving strangely too. Not violently or aggressively, just odd somehow. Standing too still sometimes, then shifting around slightly. The whole thing felt wrong enough that both girls became hyper-focused on them immediately. Still, curiosity outweighed fear at first. That is something people forget about kids and teenagers. Sometimes when something weird happens, you do not instantly panic because your brain has not fully processed danger yet. Instead, you just stare, trying to understand what you are seeing. So they stayed outside watching them for a while. At one point, my stepsister even admitted they stopped trying very hard to hide themselves because they became more fascinated than cautious. They whispered back and forth, trying to figure out who the people could be and why they were standing out there so late. She said the group never seemed loud. No shouting, no obvious conversation drifting through the field. Just movement, watching. Eventually, though, the weirdness started getting to them. My stepsister finally suggested they should probably just head back inside because the whole thing felt creepy. That was when her friend suddenly noticed something. The group had started moving down the hill toward them. The second she said that, both girls immediately crouched down low, trying to hide in the grass while watching the figures approach. And this is the detail that made the story stay in my head all these years. According to my stepsister, as the group moved closer, they stopped walking upright. Instead, they dropped down onto their hands and knees and started crawling. Not slowly either. Crawling with purpose toward where the girls were hiding. Now imagine being 12 or 13 years old, outside in the middle of nowhere at night, already nervous because a group of strangers is watching you from a hill. Then suddenly seeing them begin crawling toward you through moonlit grass. That image alone is nightmare fuel. My stepsister said both of them froze completely for a second because their brains genuinely could not process what they were seeing. Human beings are not supposed to move like that in groups. There is something deeply wrong-looking about synchronized crawling in darkness. Even hearing the story secondhand years later made my skin crawl. Then things got even stranger. Apparently, after crouching there, watching for several terrifying seconds, the girls instinctively stood back up slightly to move. And the moment they stood up, the figures stood up too, as if mimicking them. That was the exact moment both girls completely lost it. Any curiosity disappeared instantly. They turned and ran full speed back toward the house, screaming. My stepsister said she had never felt adrenaline like that before in her life. The kind where your legs feel weak and powerful at the same time, while your brain screams only one thought over and over. Get inside. Get inside. Get inside. They burst through the back door hysterical and immediately started trying to explain everything to her mom. Of course, at first her mom probably assumed they had scared themselves with shadows or ghost stories, but apparently the girls were so genuinely panicked that she took it seriously pretty quickly. And honestly, from a parent's perspective, a group of strangers near your isolated property at night is terrifying even without the crawling part. Her mom immediately worried somebody might have been watching the house looking for a chance to break in or steal something. So she went outside to check the property. According to my stepsister, her mom grabbed a flashlight and searched around the backyard area and nearby fields. But she never found anybody, no people, no footprints that she noticed, nothing moving near the hill, nothing at all, which honestly somehow made the story creepier instead of less creepy. Because if it had just been random teenagers messing around, you would expect some sign of them still being nearby. Instead, it was like the group had simply vanished back into the darkness. For years afterward, my stepsister and her friend apparently talked about that night, trying to figure out what they had actually seen. And honestly, there are a lot of possible explanations. Maybe it really was a group of local teenagers screwing around in the dark who realized they spotted younger kids watching them. Maybe they crouched down to hide and it only looked like crawling from far away. Maybe fear distorted the girl's memory afterward. Human perception at night is notoriously unreliable, especially when adrenaline kicks in. But even with all that said, there is still something deeply unsettling about the image itself. A silent group of figures standing on a moonlit hill, watching two girls from the darkness, then slowly moving toward them, dropping onto all fours, crawling through the field until the girls stood up again, then standing too, almost like they were copying them. That specific detail always bothered me most, because it feels less like normal human behavior and more like something pretending to act human while not fully understanding how humans are supposed to move. And honestly, I think that is why the story stayed with me. Not because I necessarily believe anything supernatural happened, but because certain behaviors trigger instinctive fear in people automatically. Groups moving silently, unnatural body movements, being watched from darkness, people approaching without speaking. Those things hit something ancient in the human brain. Even now, when I picture the scene, I always imagine how terrifying it must have looked under nothing but pale moonlight. Two kids standing in an open backyard surrounded by darkness, while a group of shadowy figures slowly crawled toward them across a field without making a sound. Whether it was pranksters, strangers, or just a misunderstanding created by darkness and fear, I completely understand why they ran. Years ago, I was in a relationship with a woman who lived a few hours away from me, so it was one of those semi-long distance situations where we spent a lot of time talking on the phone at night whenever we could not physically be together. It made it work pretty well, honestly. Long conversations, late night calls, random weekend visits whenever schedules lined up. Normal relationship stuff. She lived in an apartment complex at the time, and because her daughter was usually asleep by the time we talked at night, she would often step outside onto the back patio area to chat with me without waking anybody up. The complex itself looked safe on paper. Gated entrances, patrol vehicles, uniformed security guards walking around during evening and overnight shifts. The kind of place where management constantly advertised how secure the property was to residents. And honestly, for a while, she actually felt safer there because of it. At first, the security guard in question just seemed overly friendly. You know the type. The guy who talks too long, stands too close, finds excuses to stop and chat every single time he walks by. According to her, during his patrols, he would constantly pause near her patio to flirt or make conversation. At first, it mostly just came off as annoying, slightly inappropriate maybe, but not outright alarming. He would compliment her appearance, try to make jokes, act overly familiar, that sort of thing. And because she lived there alone with her daughter, she tried to stay polite instead of escalating things immediately. A lot of women do that in uncomfortable situations because being openly confrontational with somebody who already behaves oddly can sometimes make things worse. But over time, his behaviors started getting more aggressive. He began lingering longer during conversations, making comments that crossed boundaries, acting like he had some kind of personal claim over her attention simply because he worked security there. The creepiest part was the imbalance of power in the situation. This was not just some random guy hitting on tenants. This was somebody armed, in uniform, patrolling the property where she lived. Somebody who knew exactly which apartment was hers. Somebody who knew her routines. What time she was outside, when she was alone. That changes the entire feeling of a situation. People underestimate how unsettling that becomes psychologically. Once somebody with authority or access starts behaving inappropriately, your sense of safety disappears because the very person meant to protect the environment suddenly becomes the thing making it feel unsafe. I remember her telling me about him more and more often during our calls. Sometimes she sounded irritated, other times genuinely uncomfortable. Still, neither of us realized how serious things had become until one weekend when I drove down to visit her. That night, we were outside together, talking near the patio when the guard came by again during his patrol. At first, I assumed he would just keep walking after seeing she was not alone. Instead, he stopped, and immediately the atmosphere changed. You can tell when another guy is trying to establish dominance or intimidate somebody. There is this weird fake casualness some people use where every word sounds like a challenge, hidden inside normal conversation. That was exactly how he acted. He started making comments about how he saw her around all the time, then jokingly talking about stealing her away from me. But the way he said it did not sound like harmless joking. It sounded territorial, deliberate. And while talking, he kept casually running his hands over his service weapon, not drawing it, not outright threatening anybody, just touching it repeatedly while maintaining eye contact. That was the moment my stomach dropped because suddenly everything she had told me before clicked into place differently. This was not awkward flirting anymore. This was intimidation. The guy clearly wanted me to understand that he had authority there and was armed while saying he could take my girlfriend if he wanted. I remember trying to stay calm externally because escalating a confrontation with an armed security guard outside somebody's apartment at night is obviously a terrible idea. But internally, I was furious. At the same time, though, I also felt genuinely uneasy because there was something deeply unstable about the way he behaved. The casualness of it almost made it worse, like he genuinely believed his badge and weapon gave him some kind of power over the women living there. After I finally walked away, both her daughter and I basically told her the same thing immediately. This needed to be reported. Apparently, we were not the first people to feel that way either. Once police became involved and started digging into complaints, things escalated fast. Turns out, multiple tenants had already experienced similar behavior from him. Sexual harassment, threatening conduct, making women uncomfortable during patrols, using his position to intimidate people. According to what we later heard, several women had been too nervous to formally push the issue earlier. Because again, this was the guys responsible for security on the property. Some people worried nobody would believe them. Others worried about retaliation. But once enough complaints surfaced together, police acted. He ended up getting arrested. I still remember hearing that he was actually cuffed right there at the complex. And honestly, the craziest part of the whole situation was realizing how many residents apparently already feared him. before everything finally came out publicly. Afterward, my girlfriend admitted there had been nights where she avoided going outside entirely because she did not want another interaction with him. That hit me hard because something as simple as stepping onto your own patio should not feel threatening. The following weekend, she moved into my place. Not permanently planned at first, more like a let's get out of there. For now situation that eventually just became permanent. And honestly, even though nothing physically violent ended up happening, the whole experience still sticks with me years later because of how close it felt to becoming something much worse. People often picture dangerous individuals as outsiders trying to break into secure environments. But sometimes the frightening person is already inside the system itself. The guard, the authority figure, the person everybody assumes is there to protect people. That is what made the situation so unsettling to me, because the apartment complex probably looked incredibly safe to anybody touring it. Uniformed patrols, armed security, controlled entrances. But meanwhile, one of the biggest threats there was the guy wearing the security badge. And the thing I still remember most clearly is that moment during the conversation outside, when he casually touched his weapon while talking about taking her away. It was not dramatic enough to sound like a movie threat. That is exactly why it felt real. It was subtle enough that he could probably deny it afterward if confronted, but obvious enough that everybody standing there understood what he was trying to communicate. Power, intimidation, control. Honestly, looking back, I think what scares me most is how easy it would have been for people to dismiss the situation if multiple women had not spoken up together. One complaint might have been brushed off as misunderstanding. Two maybe still ignored. But eventually, enough people connected the same pattern of behavior, and that probably prevented something far worse from happening later. Because people who behave like that rarely stop on their own. They usually just keep escalating until somebody finally forces them to stop. A girl I know once told me a story that completely changed the way I think about solo hiking and camping. Not because something violent happened to her, and not because she ever even saw another person during the trip. Honestly, that is what makes the story so unsettling. The terrifying part only revealed itself after everything was already over. She was really into photography and outdoor backpacking at the time. The kind of person who loved disappearing into nature for a few days with a camera, a backpack, and absolutely no interest in dealing with crowds or tourist-heavy trails. She specifically preferred remote hiking routes because she liked photographing untouched scenery without people constantly walking through her shots. So one weekend, she planned a solo backpacking trip through part of the Appalachian Mountains. Nothing extreme by experienced hiking standards. Just a 3-day trip through some remote trails she had researched beforehand. According to her, the route was known for being quiet and lightly traveled, especially that time of year. Honestly, that isolation was part of why she chose it. She wanted silence, nature, foggy mornings, wildlife shots, long stretches of trail where the only sounds were wind, insects, and trees moving overhead. The first day apparently went perfectly. She parked at the trailhead, started hiking, and quickly left civilization behind. Cell service disappeared after a while. The trails narrowed. Forest swallowed everything around her until it felt like the outside world no longer existed. Anybody who has spent time deep in mountains or forests knows how strange that isolation can feel after enough hours. At first, it is peaceful. Then eventually your brain starts realizing how alone you truly are. No nearby roads, no lights, no people. just miles of woods stretching in every direction. But she loved that feeling. She spent the trip taking photos constantly. Trees covered in moss, fog rolling through valleys, small streams cutting through rock, sunlight coming through branches in the early morning. The kind of photos outdoor photographers live for. According to her, the entire trip felt almost unnaturally empty. Over 3 full days, she supposedly did not encounter a single other hiker. Not one. Now, that is not impossible in remote Appalachian areas, especially depending on season and trail choice, but it definitely added to the eerie feeling afterward. No voices on trails, no campsites occupied nearby, no distant flashlights at night. Nothing. Just her alone in the mountains. At night, she camped in a small tent off the trail. She cooked simple food, organized camera gear, listened to nighttime forest sounds, then went to sleep. And apparently, nothing strange happened. No footsteps around camp. No weird noises. No feeling of being watched. No damaged gear. Nothing missing. The trip ended Sunday evening when she finally hiked back out and drove home exhausted. Like most photographers, the first thing she wanted to do after unpacking was upload all her photos onto her computer. She planned to properly edit them later, but she at least wanted to quickly scroll through them before going to bed. So late Sunday night, she sat at her computer going through hundreds of pictures from the trip. Landscape shots, trees, mountain overlooks, sunlight through fog, campfire photos. Everything looked normal. And honestly, she was feeling pretty proud of the trip. Good photos, peaceful experience, successful solo hike. Then she reached the final image, and her stomach dropped instantly. The last photograph on the memory card was a picture of her asleep inside her tent. Not outside the tent, inside, sleeping. At first, her brain apparently could not even process what she was looking at. The image showed her curled up in her sleeping bag from inside the tent itself, illuminated faintly by flash or low light. According to her, it was clearly taken from near the tent entrance, looking inward directly at her while she slept. She told me she stared at the screen for a long time, trying to convince herself there had to be some explanation she was missing. Maybe she accidentally triggered the camera somehow. Maybe it was an old photo already on the card. Maybe she sleepwalked and did something without remembering. But none of those explanations fully worked. She specifically remembered clearing the memory card before the trip, and the angle made no sense, unless somebody else physically held the camera. That realization hit her all at once. Someone had entered her tent while she was asleep, or at the very least, stood inside the entrance, close enough to photograph her. And she never woke up. That is the detail that makes the story horrifying to me. Not the photo itself, the fact she slept through it. Imagine somebody being close enough to photograph you, sleeping in total wilderness, where nobody else is supposed to be around. And you never even realized they were there. She went back through the other photos afterward, trying desperately to see if she had accidentally captured another person somewhere in the background earlier during the trip. A figure between trees, a distant silhouette, anything. But according to her, there was nothing. Just empty wilderness. The more she thought about it afterward, the more disturbing possibilities started forming. Had someone been following her for part of the trip? Had another hiker found her campsite at night and decided to play some sick prank? Had somebody watched her without revealing themselves for hours or even days? Or was it someone mentally unstable wandering the woods? That uncertainty is what makes the story feel so awful, because there is no ending, no answers, no identified person. Just one photograph, proving that at some point during those 3 supposedly isolated days, another human being was standing over her while she slept. And the fact she never noticed anything somehow makes it scarier than if she had woken up, because it means whoever took the photo moved quietly enough through a dark forest campsite to approach a sleeping stranger, enter or partially enter her tent, take a picture, and leave without making enough noise to wake her. That takes confidence or experience or both. The part that always stayed with me most was imagining her alone in those mountains afterward, in retrospect, thinking she was completely isolated, thinking she had not seen another human for 3 days. Meanwhile, somebody may have been much closer than she ever realized. There is something deeply unsettling about wilderness for exactly that reason. Forests create this illusion that you would obviously notice another person nearby. But in reality, heavily wooded areas hide people incredibly well, especially at night, especially someone intentionally staying hidden. People disappear visually between trees only a few yards away sometimes. Sound moves strangely too. You can be near somebody in the woods and never realize it if they do not want to be noticed. That idea alone changes the feeling of camping entirely. I remember asking her if she ever went solo backpacking again after that. She said yes, but never the same way. After that trip, she became obsessive about campsite positioning, noise traps around tents, checking surroundings carefully, and carrying protection with her. Because once you realize how vulnerable sleeping in a tent actually makes you, it permanently changes your relationship with wilderness. A tent is basically fabric, that is it. A thin layer separating you from whatever is outside. Animals, weather, or people. And honestly, I think that is why the story spread around so much afterward. It taps directly into one of the most primal fears humans have. The fear of being watched without knowing it, especially while asleep, especially somewhere isolated where you believe you are completely alone. To this day, whenever I see peaceful photos of remote campsites deep in forests, I think about that final image sitting at the end of her camera roll. Hundreds of beautiful wilderness photographs. Then suddenly, one picture of the photographer herself, sleeping peacefully in the dark, taken by someone she never saw. I do not think this counts as a traditional scary story with ghosts or killers hiding in the dark, but honestly, it was probably one of the most terrifying moments of my life. Not because something supernatural happened, but because for a few minutes, I genuinely thought I might drown in front of the very people testing whether I was qualified to save other people from drowning. And the ironic part is that it happened during my lifeguard exam. I had spent almost a year training for it. Swimming drills, rescue practice, fitness tests, ocean safety, how to stay calm in rough water, how to conserve energy while being tumbled by waves, how to approach panicked swimmers, all of it. By the time exam day finally arrived, I felt nervous but confident. I knew I was physically capable of passing. The problem was that nature does not care how prepared you think you are. The ocean decides what kind of day you are going to have. And that day, the ocean was angry. The exam started early in the morning at the beach. I still remember standing there looking out at the water, thinking the conditions looked way rougher than anything we had trained in before. The waves were massive. Not movie tsunami, massive obviously, but way bigger than what I was comfortable with at the time. Somewhere around 3 to 4 meters tall, from what I remember. Huge rolling walls of water, crashing hard enough to shake your chest when they hit the shore. Even some of the other trainees looked nervous watching the surf, but nobody wanted to be the one to complain. We had all trained too long to back out now. The first part of the exam was basically a fitness and endurance test. We had to swim roughly 100 meters out into the surf, reach an instructor sitting on a surfboard farther out, swim around him, then make it all the way back to shore. Simple in theory. In calm water, it would have been exhausting, but manageable. In those waves, though, it felt completely different. The second you entered the water, you realized how small you actually were compared to the ocean. Every incoming wave looked like a moving wall. Timing your dives underneath them became critical, because if you mistimed one badly enough, it could slam into you hard. I remember fighting my way farther out, while already feeling tired way earlier than expected. Salt water getting in my mouth, arms burning, legs heavy, waves constantly pushing me backward every time I gained ground. Still, I made it out there. Not gracefully. Definitely not fast. I was near the back of the trainee group by that point, but I reached the guy on the surfboard, slapped it to complete the turn point, and started heading back towards shore. At first, things actually felt okay. Quarter of the way back, then halfway. I was exhausted, but manageable exhausted. The kind where you tell yourself to keep moving because land is visible, and you are already committed. Then suddenly I realized something strange. I could not hear anything behind me anymore. No crashing, no voices, no water movement. Just this weird, empty silence for a second. And instinctively I turned my head. What I saw behind me, honestly, still shows up in nightmares sometimes. A massive wave, not just big, enormous, towering directly over me, close enough that it filled my entire vision. I did not even get enough time to properly panic. I barely had enough time to realize, oh shit, before it hit me. And the impact was violent. People who have never been hit by a truly massive wave sometimes imagine it like getting knocked over in a pool. It is not. It feels like being hit by a moving building. Hundreds and hundreds of liters of water crashing into your body at once with terrifying force. The closest comparison I can think of is slamming full speed into a wall while the wall itself is also moving. The wave drove me underwater instantly before I could even take a full breath. I still remember the pressure squeezing against my chest while every instinct screamed at me not to panic. That part matters more than people realize. Panic underwater kills people fast. So even while terrified, I forced myself to stay as calm as possible, because we had trained for being tumbled by surf before. Relax. Protect your head. Do not waste oxygen fighting the water. Wait for the spin to stop. That is easier said than done when your body is being thrown around like clothing inside a washing machine. The wave spun me so violently, I completely lost all sense of direction. Up and down stopped meaning anything. 1 second, I thought I was swimming upward only to smash into deeper water instead. When the spinning finally slowed enough for me to think again, I opened my eyes underwater, trying desperately to find the surface. That was the moment I realized how deep the wave had pushed me. Everything looked dark and distorted. My lungs were already starting to burn, and I still could not immediately tell which direction led upward. Eventually, I saw lighter water above me and kicked as hard as I could. I broke the surface, gasping, and only managed maybe half a breath before the next wave crashed directly onto me, back under. At that point, my body was already reaching its limit. I had already swum over 150 meters in brutal water before getting hit by the larger waves. My limbs felt heavy. My chest hurt. My shoulders burned every time I moved my arms. And now every new impact felt worse because I had less energy left to recover. The second time underwater felt scarier because now fear had fully entered the situation. Not panic exactly, but the realization that this was no longer just an exam. This was dangerous, really dangerous. I surfaced again long enough to get maybe 2 decent breaths. This time, when the next wave came, I dove beneath it intentionally so the surface water could absorb more of the impact before it hit me. That helped slightly, but every second in those conditions drained more energy. When I came back up again, I remember genuinely considering signaling for help. And honestly, I probably should have. I could see the other lifeguards farther away. I could have raised my arm. They would have come. But the second I started lifting my hand, another thought hit me immediately. If I ask for help, I fail. And that thought mattered way too much to me at that age. I had spent an entire year training for this. Early mornings, fitness drills, ocean sessions, everything. I was so close enough to taste it. So I dropped my arm back into the water and kept swimming. Even now, I'm not sure whether that was determination or stupidity. Probably both. The rest of the swim back, honestly, became survival more than technique. I stopped thinking about the exam itself completely. My entire world narrowed down to breathing and moving. Reach forward, pull, kick, breathe, repeat. Every wave felt personal. Every breath felt stolen. At some point, I finally realized the water beneath me was getting shallower. My hands brushed sand occasionally between waves. And the second my knees could touch bottom, my body basically gave up. I stumbled forward through the surf, barely able to stand upright anymore. By the time I reached the beach properly, I collapsed onto my hands and knees, coughing seawater and trying to suck air back into my lungs. I remember the sand feeling unbelievably solid beneath me. That sounds stupid, maybe, but after being battered around underwater for what felt like forever, touching stable ground again felt surreal. For a few seconds, I genuinely just stayed there on all fours, trying not to throw up or pass out. Then somebody yelled for us to move to the next part of the exam. And somehow, I stood back up, ran a 100-meter sprint, and continued with another 2 hours of testing afterward. To this day, I honestly do not fully understand how my body kept functioning after that swim. Pure adrenaline probably carried me through the rest. The craziest part is that once the exam ended and everything settled down, people mostly talked about it casually, like it was just another rough ocean day. But for me, something changed mentally after that experience. Before then, I respected the ocean. Afterward, I feared it. Not irrationally, not in a panic way, but with the understanding that nature can humble you instantly, no matter how trained or confident you are. The ocean does not care about certifications. It does not care how many drills you practiced. One badly timed wave can remind you very quickly how fragile human beings really are. Still, though, I passed. Registered junior lifeguard. And honestly, after surviving that exam, every later rescue training session somehow felt easier by comparison. Quick interruption. I'll keep it short. A lot of people pass through here once and never come back. But the ones who hit subscribe, they're the regulars now. The ones who show up every single night without fail. If you'd like to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn the bell on too, and you'll never have to wonder when the next one drops. That's everything. Story's still going. Let's get back to it. I do not think this is the kind of scary story people usually expect when they hear the word scary. There were no ghosts, no creepy figures standing at the end of a hallway, no sudden jump scare, and nothing supernatural hiding in the dark. It was not that kind of fear, but almost drowning is its own kind of horror. It is quiet at first, then violent, then completely helpless. It is the kind of fear that does not need anything strange or mysterious to make it terrifying, because your own body becomes the thing you are fighting against. Your lungs start burning, your arms get heavy, your mind starts racing, and suddenly all you can think about is getting one clean breath of air. The strange part is that this happened during my lifeguard test. That is the part that still feels almost ridiculous when I think about it now. I was not some random person who wandered too far into the ocean without knowing what I was doing. I was there because I had trained for this. I was there because I wanted to become a lifeguard. I knew how to swim. I knew how to stay calm in the rough water. I knew what to do if a wave took me under. I had practiced again and again until those things felt almost automatic. That was the whole point of the training. We were supposed to be the people who stayed calm when everyone else panicked. But the ocean does not care how much training you have. The exam started with a fitness test. On paper, it sounded simple enough. We had to swim about 100 meters out into the water, reach a man sitting on a surfboard, swim around him or touch the board, then turn around and swim all the way back to shore. After that, there were more parts of the test waiting for us, but that first swim was supposed to prove that we had the strength and control to handle open water. I remember standing there before it started, looking out at the ocean and trying to act like I was not worried. Everyone else was around me, other trainees who had been working toward the same thing. Some of them looked calm. Some were joking a little, probably trying to shake off their nerves. I tried to do the same, but my eyes kept going back to the waves. They were huge. I had trained in waves before, of course. You cannot train to be a lifeguard and only swim in calm pool water. I had been tumbled before. I had been knocked around before. I knew what it felt like to get pushed under and come back up with salt water in my mouth and sand in my ears. But these waves were different. They were much bigger than anything I had trained in. I would guess they were somewhere around 3 to 4 meters tall. Maybe someone else would measure them differently. But standing there on the beach, they looked enormous. They looked like moving walls. The worst part was knowing that we still had to go in. Nobody called it off. Nobody said the conditions were too much. The exam was going ahead, and that meant we were going ahead with it too. I remember trying to remind myself that this was exactly why we trained. A lifeguard does not get to choose perfect conditions. People get into trouble when the water is ugly, when waves are breaking hard, when everything is dangerous. If I wanted to do this, I had to prove I could handle it. So when the test began, I ran in with everyone else. The first part was not easy, but I managed it better than I expected. Getting out through the waves took effort. The water kept pushing back, and each stroke felt like I was fighting something that was far stronger than me. Every time I thought I had made progress, another swell lifted me or shoved me sideways. Salt water splashed into my face. My breathing had to be timed carefully. I had to watch the waves, dive when I needed to, and keep moving even when my body wanted to slow down. I was not at the front of the group. I knew that. Some of the other trainees were stronger swimmers, or at least they looked stronger that day. They moved ahead of me, cutting through the water faster and with more confidence. I was closer to the back, which bothered me a little, but I told myself it did not matter as long as I completed the swim. This was not about looking perfect. It was about finishing. Eventually, I made it out to the surfboard. That part gave me a little burst of relief. I reached the man on the board, slapped it like we were supposed to, and turned around to head back toward the beach. For a second, I actually thought the worst part might be over. Swimming back to shore sounded easier. At least now the land was in front of me. At least I knew I was heading toward safety. The waves were still rough, but I had already made it out, and that gave me confidence. I started swimming back. At first, I was focused only on the movement. Stroke, breathe, kick, keep going. The shore was still far away, but it was there. I could see people on the beach. I could see the line where the water broke. I could feel how tired I already was, but tired was expected. This was an exam. It was supposed to push us. I made it about a quarter of the way back, then halfway. That was when I noticed something strange. For a few seconds, I did not hear anything behind me. In the ocean, silence like that feels wrong. Usually there is always noise. Waves crashing, people breathing, water slapping against arms and shoulders, someone shouting, something. But for a brief moment, there was this empty pause, and I looked behind me out of curiosity. That was when I saw it. A massive wave filled almost everything in my vision. It was already coming down, and there was no time to prepare properly. It looked less like water and more like a wall collapsing toward me. I did not get the chance to take a full breath. I barely had time to understand what was happening before it hit. The impact was brutal. People talk about waves like they are soft because they are made of water, but there is nothing soft about hundreds or thousands of liters of water crashing down on you from above. It hit with a force that felt almost solid, like running straight into a wall, except the wall kept moving and dragged me with it. My body folded into the force of it, and every part of me reacted at once. My chest tightened. My limbs got thrown out of place. The little bit of air I had in my lungs felt like it was being squeezed out of me. I fought not to lose it. That was the first real moment of fear. Not the big wave itself, not even being underwater, but feeling that pressure on my chest and knowing I had not taken enough air before going under. I knew that if I panicked and let that air out, I would be in real trouble. The waves spun me around like I was inside a washing machine. Up and down stopped meaning anything. Left and right disappeared. My body twisted and rolled, and the water threw me around so hard that I could not control where I was going. I had been tumbled before during training, so some part of me knew what to do. Stay as relaxed as possible. Do not waste energy fighting the spin. Wait for the worst of it to pass. Find the surface. Do not panic. But knowing those things and doing them while your lungs are already burning are not the same. I tried to stay calm. I really did. I let myself move with it instead of thrashing, because thrashing only wastes oxygen. I kept telling myself that the wave would pass, that I would stop spinning, that I would find the light and swim up. Finally, the tumbling slowed. I opened my eyes in the water and looked around, trying to find the surface. For one awful second, I could not tell where it was. The wave had pushed me deeper than I expected, and my sense of direction was completely destroyed. Everything around me was green and white and full of bubbles. There was no clear up or down. My body wanted to kick in any direction just to move, but I forced myself to look. I needed to know where I was going. If I swam the wrong way, even for a few seconds, I could waste the last air I had. Then I saw the light above me. I kicked hard. By the time I broke the surface, my lungs already hurt. Not just a little. They were burning in that deep, desperate way that makes your whole body scream at you to breathe. I opened my mouth and managed to grab maybe half a breath. Then the next wave landed directly on my head. It was almost unfair. I had barely reached air before it was gone again. The waves slammed me down, and I went under a second time. This one felt worse because I was already tired. The first hit had taken so much out of me, and now I was being forced back under before I had recovered. My arms and legs felt heavier. My chest hurt more. My mind, which had been calm enough during the first tumble, started to feel sharper and more frantic. This was not just hard anymore. This was dangerous. I was about 150 meters into this whole swim by then, in water that felt completely different from anything I had trained in. I had already fought my way out, turned back, and taken 2 heavy waves. My limbs were burning from effort. My shoulders felt like they had weights tied to them. Every part of my body hurt from the impacts. My lungs were screaming for air, and the ocean did not give me time to think. When I came up again, I managed to get 2 good breaths. They were not calm breaths. They were ugly, desperate breaths. The kind where you feel like you are drinking the air more than breathing it. But they were enough to keep me going. Another wave was coming. This time, I did what I should have done before. I dove under it before it broke directly on me. I went down on purpose and let the main force of the wave pass over the surface instead of taking the full impact on my body. It still pulled at me, still shoved me around, but it did not crush me the same way. When I came back up, I had a tiny bit more control. I looked toward shore. It was still there. It felt close and far at the same time. Close enough that I could see it clearly, far enough that it might as well have been another country. That was when I started signaling for help. It was instinct at first. I knew the signal. I knew what to do if I was in trouble. Other lifeguards were there. That was the whole point of having people watching. If I needed help, I was supposed to signal. That was what any normal person would do. That was what I would tell someone else to do. I raised my arm, then I stopped. Because the thought hit me all at once. If I called for help, I would fail. I had trained for a year for this, a full year of swimming, practicing, pushing myself, learning rescue skills, building stamina, preparing for this exact test. I had pictured finishing it so many times. I had put so much time into becoming good enough. And now I was so close. The beach was in front of me. I could see the end. I could almost feel it. Calling for help would be the smart choice if I truly could not continue. But it would also mean the exam was over for me. That thought made me hesitate. Looking back, I know how dangerous that kind of thinking can be. Pride can get people killed in the water. Wanting to pass a test should never matter more than staying alive. But in that moment, with my body exhausted and my brain running on fear and adrenaline, it felt like the whole year of training was hanging over me. I did not want to quit. I did not want the ocean to beat me right at the end. I did not want to crawl out knowing I had failed before the real exam had even begun. So I put my head down and swam. From that point on, I do not remember every second clearly. I remember pieces. I remember the taste of salt water. I remember the burning in my chest. I remember trying to time the waves, trying to dive when I had to, trying to breathe whenever I had even half a chance. I remember how heavy my arms felt every time I pulled them through the water. I remember my legs kicking even though they felt like they were no longer part of me. There were moments when the beach seemed to get closer, then moments when a wave dragged me back and made it feel like I had lost all the progress I had just made. That was one of the most frustrating and frightening parts. In a pool, effort usually turns into distance. You swim and you move forward. In rough ocean water, effort does not always mean progress. Sometimes you fight with everything you have and still end up almost where you started. But I kept moving. I stopped thinking about the whole distance and focused only on the next few seconds. Get through this wave. Take a breath. Swim 5 more strokes. Watch the next swell. Dive. Come up. Breathe again. Keep going. Do not think about failing. Do not think about drowning. Do not think about how tired you are. Just move. Eventually, the water got shallower. That should have been a relief, and it was, but shallow water in heavy surf can be its own nightmare. The waves break harder there. The water pulls at your legs. You get pushed forward and dragged back. You are close enough to safety to see it, but not always close enough to stand properly. I remember trying to get my feet under me and almost losing balance. My body was too tired to move smoothly anymore. When I finally reached the beach, I did not run out like some strong lifeguard candidate, finishing a clean test. I crawled. I was on my hands and knees in the sand, completely wrecked. My arms shook under me. My chest was heaving. I had sand stuck to my wet skin, salt water running down my face, and my body felt like it had been beaten. I collapsed face first for a moment, just needing 1 second where I did not have to fight anything. No wave, no current, no next breath being stolen. Just air. For a few seconds, I lay there and breathed. That alone felt incredible. Air felt like the best thing in the world. Solid ground felt unreal. The beach, which had looked so far away from the water, was suddenly under me, and I was alive. But the test was not over. That is the part that still makes me laugh a little, though at the time it did not feel funny at all. I had just been through one of the scariest experiences of my life. I had nearly called for help. I had dragged myself onto the beach like someone who had barely survived a shipwreck. And then I had to get up and keep going. So I stood up. My body did not want to. Every muscle protested. My lungs still hurt. My legs felt weak, and my head was still full of the roar of the waves. But I stood up anyway, because the next part of the exam was waiting. Then I had to do a 100-meter sprint. After that, there were still about 2 more hours of examination. Somehow I got through it. I do not know if I looked good doing it. I doubt I did. I probably looked half dead for part of it. But I kept going, and I finished everything they asked me to do. The whole time, there was this strange mix of fear, exhaustion, pride, and disbelief running through me. Part of me was still back in the water, getting slammed under that first huge wave. Part of me could still feel the panic of surfacing and only getting half a breath before being pushed down again. But another part of me knew I had made it. By the end of it, I was officially a registered junior lifeguard. So, yes, I passed. Was it worth it? I guess it was. At least that is what I tell myself now. But I will never forget that swim. I will never forget looking back and seeing that massive wave rise over me. I will never forget the feeling of being spun underwater with no idea which way was up. I will never forget how badly my lungs burned, or how close I came to raising my hand and asking to be rescued during my own lifeguard test. It was not a haunted house kind of scary. It was not the kind of fear where something jumps out at you and then it is over. It was worse in a way because it was real, and because it built second by second. It was the fear of knowing that the only thing between you and drowning was your own tired body, your training, and whatever calm you could force yourself to hold on to. And the ocean was not trying to scare me. It was just doing what the ocean does. About 3 years ago, near the end of October, I came home after a long and exhausting day at school. I remember feeling completely drained. All I wanted to do was throw my backpack somewhere, sit down, and relax for the rest of the evening without worrying about anything. It had been one of those days where every class felt longer than usual, and by the time I finally got home, I was already thinking about food, video games, and sleep. The weather outside looked strange, though. The sky was darker than normal for that time of day. Not nighttime dark, but the kind of dark gray that makes everything outside feel colder and quieter. The clouds looked heavy, almost like they were hanging low over the neighborhood. Even the air felt weird in a way I could not explain back then. Looking back now, it should have been obvious that something bad was coming. But at the time, I did what most people probably would do. I brushed it off completely. I just assumed a storm was coming. Where I lived, storms were not exactly rare. Every now and then we would get heavy rain, strong wind, thunder loud enough to shake the windows, and power outages that lasted a couple hours. So when I saw the dark sky, I did not think much of it. If anything, I thought it might actually be relaxing. Stay inside, hear the rain hit the windows, maybe get lucky and have school delayed the next day. That was the kind of stuff going through my head. Then my stepdad suddenly said there was a tornado warning. He had gotten an alert on his phone, and he said it seriously enough that everyone in the room stopped what they were doing for a second. But even then, I still did not take it seriously. Honestly, I thought he was joking around. He liked messing with us sometimes, especially if he could scare me or my siblings a little bit for fun. So when he said a tornado was coming, I laughed it off and figured he was exaggerating to get a reaction out of us. Huge mistake. Over the next few minutes, the weather outside started getting worse fast. The wind picked up harder and harder until it sounded like something was pushing against the entire house. I do not mean normal windy weather either. I mean the kind of wind that instantly makes your stomach feel nervous because it sounds unnatural. It was loud enough that I could hear it over everything else in the house. The trees outside were bending like they were trying not to snap in half. I remember standing near a window for a moment and just watching it. The sky looked almost greenish-gray at one point, and everything outside had this eerie look to it. There was barely anyone outside anymore. No cars driving around, no people walking, nothing. It felt like the whole neighborhood had suddenly disappeared indoors. The wind kept getting stronger, making this deep howling noise that echoed around the house. At that point, I started realizing my stepdad was not joking. He told all of us to get downstairs immediately because it looked like the tornado was actually happening. The tone in his voice changed completely. Before that, everything had felt uncertain. But now, even he looked worried. That alone scared me more than the storm itself. Adults usually try to stay calm around kids during emergencies, so seeing him act serious made everything suddenly feel real. We all headed downstairs together. The whole atmosphere in the house changed in minutes. Earlier, I had been thinking about relaxing after school. Now, everyone was moving quickly, grabbing things, checking phones, and listening for updates. My siblings were nervous too, though nobody was really talking much anymore. Then the power went out. Honestly, that was probably the moment where the fear really hit me. 1 second, there were lights, noise from electronics, and normal life. The next second, everything went black, not dim, completely pitch black. It felt like the storm had swallowed the entire house in one instant. The only things left were the sounds outside, and somehow those sounded even worse once the power was gone. The wind was insane. It sounded like something giant was tearing through the neighborhood. I know this sounds dramatic, but at the time it genuinely felt like the entire world outside was falling apart. The house creaked every few seconds, and every loud bang or cracking sound made me think something had hit us. The windows rattled hard enough to make me think they might shatter. I remember thinking it sounded like God himself was outside blowing against the house. That is honestly the best way I can describe it. My stepdad eventually lit a couple of candles around the basement and lower floor just so we could see something. Those candles barely lit anything, but even that small amount of light felt comforting. Without them, it felt like we were trapped underground while the world ended outside. The weird thing about darkness during a storm is how much it changes your imagination. Every sound suddenly feels dangerous. Every creak sounds worse than it probably is. I kept imagining trees falling through the roof or windows exploding upstairs. I kept listening for the sound of something massive hitting the house. The storm outside sounded alive in a way that normal weather never does. At one point, my stepdad tried to take us somewhere to get food. The power outage had made things difficult at home, and obviously nobody could cook normally. I think he figured maybe somewhere nearby still had electricity and was open, so we piled into the car and headed out. Looking back, it was probably also his way of distracting us from panicking. The moment we got onto the road, though, we realized everybody else had the same idea. Traffic was awful. Cars were lined up everywhere. Some traffic lights were completely dead because of the power outage, which made everything move even slower. People were driving carefully because branches and debris were scattered all over the roads already. The sky still looked horrible, and even sitting inside the car felt tense because the wind had not completely died down yet. Eventually, my stepdad gave up on the idea and turned around to head back home. There was no point sitting in endless traffic just to maybe find a place that was open. So we went back and waited for my mom to return from work instead. That wait felt long. Without electricity, there was not much to do besides sit around and listen to updates from phones whenever the signal worked properly. The house felt colder without lights and normal noise filling it. Every room looked strange in candlelight. Time moved slowly. Eventually, my mom finally came home from work. I remember feeling relieved the second she walked through the door because it made everything feel a little more normal again. She immediately started trying to figure out what food she could make despite the power outage. Since the stove obviously would not work, she used some kind of campfire boiler or portable cooking setup. I honestly do not remember exactly what it was called, but somehow she managed to make chicken soup for everyone. That soup tasted way better than normal food probably should have. I think part of it was because everybody was stressed and hungry, but another part was just the comfort of sitting together while the storm slowly calmed down outside. Even though the situation still felt scary, eating warm food with candles lit around the room made things feel less chaotic for a little while. By then it was clear we would not be going to school the next day. The storm had caused too much damage around the area already. Trees were down everywhere, roads were blocked, and large parts of the town still had no electricity. As a kid, getting a day off school normally sounded exciting, but this did not really feel exciting. It felt eerie more than anything. The next day, my stepdad took us out to Burger King so we could finally get a proper meal. Some places had regained power by then, while others still looked completely dead. Driving through town that day was honestly surreal, because that was when I finally saw how much damage the storm had actually caused. The neighborhood looked completely different in some areas. Huge trees had been ripped out of the ground like they weighed nothing. Some roads were partially blocked by broken branches and debris. One tree had fallen directly onto somebody's house. Seeing that made my stomach drop a little because it suddenly hit me how lucky we had gotten. If the tornado or storm had shifted slightly, that easily could have happened to us too. There was also a massive billboard nearby that had been destroyed. The poster on it had been completely ripped apart, hanging in pieces and flapping in the wind. Parts of the metal frame looked bent. It was weird seeing something so large damaged that badly, because it made the storm feel even more powerful in my head. Inside Burger King, the televisions were all showing news coverage about the storm. Every channel seemed to be talking about tornado damage, fallen trees, damaged homes, blocked roads, and power outages across different areas. Reporters were standing outside destroyed neighborhoods while emergency vehicles moved around behind them. Some houses had roofs torn apart, others had entire sections missing. Watching all that while sitting there eating fast food felt strange. Just the night before, I had been downstairs in darkness listening to the storm and wondering how bad things really were. Now I was seeing the answer on TV and outside the car windows at the same time. That was also the moment I fully realized how lucky my family had been. Yes, the experience was terrifying. Yes, the storm caused damage around us. But it could have been so much worse. Some people lost parts of their homes. Some families probably had nowhere safe to stay afterward. If the tornado had touched down closer to us, or if a tree had fallen differently, things could have ended very badly. That thought stayed with me afterward. Before that day, tornado warnings had honestly never seemed that serious to me. I had heard alerts before growing up, but most of the time nothing major happened nearby. Because of that, I think I developed the same attitude a lot of people do, where you stop taking warnings seriously after hearing them too many times. That storm completely changed that mindset. Now, whenever I hear tornado sirens or severe weather alerts, I pay attention immediately. I know what it feels like to sit in darkness while the wind outside sounds powerful enough to tear your house apart. I know what it feels like to realize nature can turn dangerous incredibly fast. And the craziest part is that this was my very first real encounter with a tornado. Before then, tornadoes were just things I saw in movies, documentaries, or weather videos online. They never felt real to me personally. After that night, they definitely did. Even now, years later, I still remember certain details clearly. The strange color of the sky, the way the wind sounded, the moment the lights went out, the candles downstairs, my mom making soup while the storm passed outside, seeing the damage the next day, and realizing how close disaster had actually been. It is weird how one storm can completely change the way you look at weather forever. Whenever the sky gets unusually dark now, or the wind suddenly starts picking up hard, part of my brain immediately goes back to that night. I still remember how quickly everything escalated from probably just a storm to sitting in a powerless house during a tornado warning. And honestly, that experience taught me something important. Nature does not care whether you believe the warning or not. It does not matter if you think somebody is joking. It does not matter if you assume everything will probably be fine. Storms can become dangerous incredibly fast, and sometimes the only thing you can really do is get somewhere safe and hope it passes without destroying everything around you. Luckily for us, it did. But I do not think I will ever forget hearing those winds for the first time. A while ago, in the city where I went to school, something happened that honestly still creeps me out whenever I think about it. It was not the kind of scary story involving ghosts, strange noises, or something supernatural hiding in the dark. It was the kind of story that is disturbing because it actually happened, and because the people involved were real ordinary people living normal lives until suddenly everything turned into a nightmare. From what I remember, it happened sometime last year. A young guy killed both his mother and grandmother inside their home, and then called the police himself afterward. Even writing that still feels unreal to me because it sounds like the kind of thing you only hear about in documentaries or crime shows. not something connected to a place you actually know. When news about it first spread around town, everybody was shocked. It became one of those stories people kept quietly talking about at school, at stores, online, basically everywhere. In smaller cities especially, something like that spreads fast because people always know somebody connected to it somehow. Maybe a relative, a neighbor, a classmate, or someone who used to know the family. For me, the part that made it feel especially unsettling was finding out that two of my friends had actually known the guy when they were younger. Not closely or anything like that, but they had apparently been in the same class as him at some point in elementary school. I cannot remember exactly which grade they said it was. I think somewhere between first and fourth grade. They were kids at the time, so obviously nobody thought much of anything back then. He was just another student sitting in class like everybody else. That is the part that always gets me about stories like this. When somebody commits a horrible crime, people immediately start looking backward through every detail of their life, trying to figure out if there were warning signs all along. Everybody starts asking the same questions. Did anybody notice something strange? Did anybody think something was wrong? Could this have been prevented somehow? My friends told me there was one thing they remembered hearing about from back then. Apparently, during class one day, he drew a picture showing a soldier killing people. I do not know exactly how graphic it was or what the full drawing looked like, but I guess it disturbed the teachers enough that they sent him to a psychologist afterward. At the time, it probably just seemed concerning in the way strange behavior from kids sometimes does. But after what happened years later, hearing that detail suddenly feels a lot darker. The creepy part is not even necessarily the drawing itself. Kids draw weird things all the time. A lot of children make violent drawings because of movies, games, television, or simply imagination. Most of the time, it means absolutely nothing. That is important to remember. Plenty of perfectly normal people probably drew violent or disturbing pictures as kids and grew up completely harmless. But when something terrible eventually does happen, every small thing from the past suddenly starts looking different. That drawing became one of those details people remembered because it felt like some kind of warning sign in hindsight. Whether it actually was or not, nobody really knows. Maybe it meant something serious. Maybe it did not. Maybe there were deeper issues nobody understood at the time. Or maybe it was just one strange moment that people attached meaning to later because of the tragedy. Still, it is hard not to think about it. I think what scares me most about stories like this is how ordinary everything probably seemed before it happened. Imagine being in elementary school, sitting next to someone during class, talking normally, sharing jokes, doing assignments together, and then years later hearing that same person committed something horrific. It creates this strange, uncomfortable feeling because it reminds you that you never fully know what is going on inside another person's mind. When my friends talked about him, they did not describe some obviously terrifying kid everyone feared. They mostly remembered him as just another student. That almost makes it worse in a way. If someone acts openly dangerous all the time, people expect bad things from them eventually. But when someone seems mostly normal, it becomes unsettling because there is no clear line between ordinary life and something terrible happening later. I think that is why true crime stories disturb people so much more than fictional horror sometimes. Ghost stories are easy to separate from reality. Monsters are easy to imagine as something distant and unreal. But crimes like this happen in regular homes, regular neighborhoods, regular cities. The people involved often went to normal schools, had classmates, families, routines, and daily lives just like everyone else. Then, suddenly, one day, something snaps. And afterward, everybody starts replaying old memories, trying to find clues that might explain it. I remember, after hearing about it, I started thinking about all the people you casually meet throughout life. Kids from school you barely remember. Quiet classmates. Random people you sit near for years without really knowing them deeply. Most eventually disappear from your life completely after graduation, and you never think about them again. Then, sometimes years later, you hear one shocking thing about somebody, and it completely changes the way you remember them forever. That is exactly what happened here. Before the murders, this guy was probably just a vague memory to most people who knew him. Another former student nobody had thought about in years. Then suddenly, his name became attached to something horrifying, and every tiny memory connected to him started feeling eerie afterward. The drawing story especially stuck in my head because it creates that uncomfortable question people always ask after tragedies like this. Were there warning signs nobody fully understood at the time? Psychologists and experts probably debate things like that constantly. Human behavior is complicated. Violence usually does not come from one single thing. Most people who show strange behavior as children never become dangerous criminals. But every now and then, when something awful does happen, people naturally go searching through the past, trying to connect dots. I honestly cannot imagine what it must feel like for his old classmate or teachers. Imagine remembering a random moment from elementary school and then years later realizing it involved somebody who eventually committed murder. Even if the memory itself was small, your brain probably replays it differently forever afterward. That kind of thing changes the atmosphere of memories. A normal classroom moment suddenly feels sinister in hindsight, even if nobody thought much of it originally. The whole situation also reminded me how fragile people's understanding of each other really is. Most of the time, we only know the version of people they show publicly. Teachers see students at school. Friends see them socially. Neighbors wave hello outside. But nobody fully sees what happens inside someone's mind or home life all the time. Sometimes serious problems stay hidden for years, and when terrible things finally happen, everybody looks back shocked because the person did not seem capable of it. That is what makes stories like this linger in your head long after hearing them. There is no comforting supernatural explanation. No monster hiding in the shadows. Just a real human being whose life somehow led to something horrific. The fact he called the police himself afterward makes the story even stranger to me. I always wonder what goes through somebody's mind after something like that. Fear? Regret? Shock? Nothing at all? It is impossible to fully understand unless you are inside that person's head. And honestly, that is probably a terrifying thought on its own. The older I get, the more disturbing I find real stories like this compared to fictional horror. Because at the end of the day, the scariest thing is not ghosts or monsters. It is the realization that terrible things can come from completely ordinary places, involving completely ordinary people. And sometimes nobody realizes how wrong things are until it is far too late. Years ago, one of my former coworkers told me a story that honestly still sticks with me, no matter how many times I replay it in my head. Normally, when people tell ghost stories at work or during late-night conversations, there is always that feeling that maybe they are exaggerating things or trying too hard to sound creepy. But this guy was different. He was not the kind of person who lied for attention, and he definitely was not someone who acted dramatic just to entertain people. That was part of what made the story so unsettling. For the sake of the story, I'll call him E. E was already in his 30s when he told me this, not some teenager trying to scare people for laughs. He was a normal guy, quiet for the most part, hardworking, pretty sarcastic, and honestly the type of person who usually made fun of paranormal stories instead of believing them. He never claimed to be religious, never acted superstitious, and never tried convincing people that demons or spirits were real. That made the whole thing feel stranger because he told the story very casually, almost like he himself still did not fully understand what had happened. According to him, the first time it happened was when he was around 8 years old. E grew up mostly raised by his mother because his father disappeared from his life early on. You know the old joke people make about fathers leaving to buy cigarettes and never coming back? That was basically his childhood. His dad walked out when he was young, leaving his mother to raise him alone. From the way E described it, his childhood was pretty ordinary otherwise. He went to school, played outside, watched cartoons, did normal kid stuff. Nothing especially traumatic or unusual. No creepy old houses, no stories about seances or occult nonsense, no deeply religious upbringing where people talked about demons constantly. Just a regular kid growing up with a single mom trying to make life work. Then one night, everything changed. E said he woke up sometime between 1:30 and 3:30 in the morning. He did not remember the exact time, only that it was deep into the night when everything in the house was completely silent. You know that strange silence houses have late at night where even small sounds feel amplified? That kind of silence. At first he thought something had woken him up. Maybe a noise outside, maybe a bad dream, maybe nothing at all. But when he opened his eyes, he realized there was something standing in his room. Not a person, exactly. A figure. He described it as dark and shadowy, almost like a silhouette standing in the corner where the room was darkest. But the part he remembered most clearly were the eyes, bright red, not glowing like a flashlight or cartoon laser beams, but sharp enough that he could clearly see them staring at him in the darkness. Now, obviously, hearing this from an adult sounds insane. Most people would assume it was a nightmare or sleep paralysis or a child imagining things in the dark. And honestly, if the story had ended there, that probably would have been my assumption too. But according to E, the figure actually spoke to him. Not loudly, calmly. The thing told him he needed to clean his room. That sounds almost ridiculous when you say it out loud. A terrifying shadow creature with red eyes appearing in a child's bedroom to complain about messiness. But somehow that weirdness actually makes the story creepier to me, because dreams usually feel chaotic or random. This felt strangely specific. He said he was frightened enough that he got out of bed and walked straight to his mother's room. Imagine being his mother for a second. You are asleep in the middle of the night when your 8-year-old suddenly walks into your room talking about a man with glowing red eyes standing in his bedroom. According to E, the conversation went something like this. Mom, the man with the red eyes told me I have to clean my room. Still half asleep, his mother probably assumed he had a nightmare or was imagining things. Okay, honey, how about we sleep because it's still nighttime? But E apparently kept insisting. Well, I don't want the man with the red eyes mad at me. That line alone gives me chills. Not because it sounds dramatic, but because it sounds exactly like something a frightened kid would actually say. His mother finally responded the way most exhausted parents probably would. Well, tell him, your mother told you so, and that's final. And that was that, at least for a while. I eventually fell back asleep, and life continued normally afterward. No possessed behavior, no weird obsession with the paranormal, no sudden religious awakening. Nothing. Years passed, and the story became one of those strange childhood memories he rarely thought about anymore. That alone could easily be explained away. Kids see things sometimes. Imaginations are powerful. Nightmares can feel real. A tired brain can turn shadows into faces and coats hanging in corners into monsters. Most people probably have at least one creepy memory from childhood that still unsettles them, even if they logically know it was probably nothing. But 14 years later, something happened that completely changed how E looked at that night. By then, he was in college. He lived in a dorm and apparently shared part of the space with a Russian exchange student he had been seeing. From the way he told the story, this happened after they had hooked up one night. They were lying in bed, talking afterward, when suddenly E noticed something standing in the corner of the room. The same figure, same dark shape, same red eyes. At first, he genuinely thought maybe he was losing his mind. Imagine being in your 20s and suddenly seeing something you last saw as a child standing silently in your dorm room. Your brain would immediately try to rationalize it. Maybe you are tired, maybe drunk. Maybe your eyes are playing tricks on you. So E turned to the girl and apparently said something like, "Hey, don't freak out, but there's something standing in the corner with red eyes." Naturally, she thought he was screwing around. "What the hell are you talking about?" But E kept staring at the corner. "There's this figure standing over there watching us, and I can't tell if I'm messed up or actually seeing it." At this point, the girl apparently started getting uncomfortable fast. And honestly, who wouldn't? Imagine lying in bed with someone and they suddenly start calmly describing a shadow creature standing in the room watching both of you. She basically asked if he was serious or if she needed to leave immediately. Now, this is the part of the story that always stuck with me most. Most people, if they genuinely believed they were seeing some horrifying figure with glowing red eyes standing in their room, would panic. They would freeze, run, scream, turn on every light in the building. Something. Not E. According to him, he got annoyed. That is somehow funnier and scarier at the same time. Instead of panicking, he got out of bed completely naked and walked directly toward the thing. Even telling the story years later, E laughed a little at this part because he admitted it was probably one of the dumbest things he had ever done. But in the moment, he said he was more irritated than afraid. He walked right up to the figure and said, "I don't know who the hell you are, but out of all the haunted spirits, you have to be the most perverted one of them all." That line sounded exactly like him, too. Crude, sarcastic, fearless in a reckless kind of way. And according to E, the second he finished saying that, the curtains over the dorm window suddenly ripped down from the wall. Not slowly, not slipping loose because of weak hooks. He said they violently dropped all at once. At that point, both of them freaked out. The Russian girl started screaming. E backed away from the corner, and whatever was standing there was suddenly gone. Now, obviously, when people hear stories like this, there are a million logical explanations they can come up with. Maybe the curtains were loose already. Maybe they simply fell at the worst possible moment. Maybe exhaustion, stress, alcohol, or sleep deprivation played tricks on his mind. Maybe the childhood memory influenced what he thought he saw later in life. And honestly, maybe all of that is true. But the reason the story always stuck with me is because of how E told it. There was no dramatic ghost hunter energy. No, this proves demons are real nonsense. No attempt to convince people. He actually sounded uncomfortable talking about it, like he himself did not know what to believe. What made it even creepier was that he claimed he kept occasionally seeing the figure after that. Not constantly, not every day, but every once in a while, especially late at night, he would catch sight of what looked like a dark shape, standing somewhere nearby with those same red eyes watching him, sometimes in corners, sometimes outside windows, sometimes only for a split second before disappearing. He never claimed it attacked him or spoke to him again. According to him, it mostly just watched. And honestly, I think that makes the story worse. A lot of horror stories become less scary the more details you add because eventually they sound fake or overdramatic. But this one stayed creepy because of how simple it was. No giant demon, no dramatic possession, no cursed object. Just the image of a shadowy figure silently appearing throughout someone's life. Watching, waiting, always with those red eyes. The older I get, the more I realize stories do not have to be true to feel disturbing. Sometimes just imagining them is enough, and whether E actually saw something paranormal or not, the image his story creates is hard to shake, especially late at night, especially when you wake up suddenly and your room is still dark. Because after hearing that story, every hanging jacket, every shadow in the corner, every strange shape your eyes catch in darkness, suddenly feels a little different for a second. And I think that is why the story stuck with me for so many years. Not because I fully believe it, but because part of me is never completely sure I don't. When I was in basic training for the Navy, one of the drill instructors told us a story that stuck with me for years afterward. Not because it was supernatural or mysterious, but because of how cold and realistic it sounded. It was one of those stories that instantly changes the way you look at life around groups of people forced to live and work together for long periods of time. Anybody who has ever been around military environments knows there is a strange social pressure that develops on ships, bases, and during training. You are trapped around the same people constantly. There is almost no privacy. Tempers get shorter. Small personality flaws become huge problems over time. Somebody who is mildly annoying in normal life can become unbearable when you cannot escape them for months. Our instructor was the kind of guy who almost never joked when telling stories. That made everything sound more serious. He had that exhausted tone older military guys sometimes get. Like they have already seen too much nonsense from human beings to be surprised anymore. One day during training, somehow the conversation shifted toward accidents at sea and how dangerous ships actually are. Most civilians picture the Navy as clean uniforms and organized operations, but ships are giant floating machines filled with dangerous equipment, heavy machinery, tight spaces, and endless opportunities for terrible accidents. That is when the instructor brought up this guy. According to him, there was a sailor on one of the ships he had either served on or heard about directly from others. I cannot remember if he claimed to know the guy personally or not, but he told the story like it was something everybody around that ship knew about afterward. Apparently, the sailor had a reputation for being an absolute asshole, not just kind of rude. The way the instructor described him, this guy had managed to make almost everybody hate him. He bullied people, talked down to others, constantly caused problems, and generally made life miserable for the crew around him. Now, on land, if somebody is awful, you can usually avoid them eventually. Go home, leave the room, stop hanging around them. On a ship, you cannot really do that. You work together, eat together, sleep in the same areas, see the same faces every single day. Tension builds differently out there because there is physically nowhere else to go. Anyway, according to the story, one day the guy went overboard. Anybody familiar with ships knows that man overboard is treated incredibly seriously. The second somebody goes into the water, especially in open ocean, everything becomes chaos immediately. Alarms go off. People start shouting. Search procedures begin instantly. Because the ocean does not forgive mistakes. The instructor described how the ship apparently stopped and began full search operation. They threw flotation devices, scanned the water, changed course, and did everything they were supposed to do. But they never found him. No body, no sign of him, nothing. At first, it was treated like a tragic accident, which honestly makes sense. Falling overboard on a ship is completely possible, especially during rough weather, exhaustion, darkness, or while working dangerous areas. But then, a few days later, somebody in one of the ship's gyms noticed something else. A 25-pound weight plate was missing. Not misplaced. Missing. Now maybe that sounds small, but on ships, people notice missing equipment quickly because space is limited and everything has designated places. According to the instructor, it did not take long before people quietly started connecting the dots. Asshole sailor disappears overboard. Heavy weight plate disappears too. And suddenly, the story no longer sounded like an accident anymore. The implication hit all of us immediately when the instructor told it. If somebody tied that weight to him before throwing him overboard, there was almost no chance he would ever surface again. The ocean would simply take him. No evidence, no witnesses willing to speak, no body recovered. Just another man overboard incident, lost somewhere in endless dark water. I remember the room going unusually quiet afterward, because even though none of us knew whether the story was fully true, it felt believable in a disturbing way. Not because sailors are secretly murderers or anything dramatic like that, but because isolated environments change people. History is full of stories from ships, submarines, oil rigs, prisons, and remote camps where social tensions slowly become toxic over time. Human beings are not designed to live under constant pressure without escape. And the ocean itself adds another layer to that feeling. There is something deeply unsettling about the idea of disappearing at sea, because the environment feels so absolute. On land, evidence usually remains. Bodies are found. Scenes can be investigated. At sea, things vanish, especially at night, especially in rough water. The instructor never claimed anybody was officially charged or investigated for murder. In fact, the way he told it made it sound like one of those dark stories sailors pass around quietly over the years. Unofficial stories, the kind where everybody knows what probably happened, but nobody can prove anything. Honestly, that uncertainty made it creepier. Because once you start thinking about it logically, it becomes terrifyingly plausible. If someone truly wanted another sailor gone during the middle of the ocean, there are few environments on Earth more difficult to investigate afterward. No cameras everywhere like modern cities. No random witnesses walking by. Nothing except black water stretching for miles. And once somebody disappears beneath the surface, recovery becomes almost impossible depending on conditions. I remember another thing the instructor said afterward too. He looked around at all of us and basically told us, one of the most dangerous things in military life is letting personal hatred grow unchecked in close environments. At the time, I thought he was mostly trying to scare us into behaving professionally with each other. But as I got older, I realized he was probably telling the truth. People underestimate how dangerous prolonged resentment can become when there is no escape from the person causing it, especially in high-stress environments. The craziest part is imagining how the crew probably reacted privately afterward. Because even if nobody openly accused anyone, you know rumors would spread immediately. People whispering in sleeping quarters. People eyeing each other differently. People quietly wondering who hated the guy enough to do something like that. Or maybe wondering whether it truly was just an accident and the weight plate disappearing was a coincidence. Though honestly, that seems hard to believe. A missing man and a missing 25-pound weight appearing days apart is the kind of thing human brains naturally connect instantly. And if it really was intentional, then whoever did it probably understood exactly how the ocean works. That part always stayed with me too. The cold practicality of it. Not rage, not some dramatic movie-style confrontation. Just a solution designed to make sure nothing ever came back up. The ocean has a terrifying finality to it that land does not. Once something sinks deep enough, it may as well vanish from the world entirely. Years later, I still do not know whether the story was true, exaggerated, or partly made up to teach recruits some kind of lesson. Military stories have a way of growing darker and stranger every time they get retold. But honestly, it sounded believable enough that every single person in that room went quiet after hearing it, because deep down, everybody understood the same thing. In isolated places far away from normal society, people are still just people. And sometimes people are capable of very dark things when they think nobody will ever find out. So that's where we'll leave it tonight. Here's something worth sitting with before you go. Every single thing you just heard actually happened. Not a script, not a writer's imagination. Real names, real places, real people who had no idea what was coming. If that lands with you the way it lands with most folks, do me one favor and subscribe before you close out. I post these often, and I'd hate for you to miss one. Take care of yourself out there. See you on the next one.